As we move on with the program today, we are going to be tackling an issue that is very close to my heart, and that is the growing problem of anxiety and depression amongst young children. I think with the high expectations that society and parents are putting on children, as well as the pandemic and everything that takes place on social media, our children are really struggling under these pressures. And so I'm going to be joined in a panel discussion today by Lauren Davies, who is a psychometrist and also the AEE Career Development Coordinator, and Bridget Ward, who is the AEE Marketing Officer. And we trust that as we share some insights and some experiences, that we will give you tools that will equip you and your staff to help our children deal with these very real issues. So I'm going to hand over to Bridget, who is going to start off this discussion.
Thanks, Tyron. Thanks. Hi, Lauren.
Hi, Bridget.
Absolutely. Social media really is a place where we're seeing a direct link to anxiety and stress amongst young children. But before we get into the discussion, I just want to share a story with you. And I'm going to start by asking a question. Who's afraid of spiders? Or who's ever run inadvertently into a spider web? So my story as a young child, I probably was about 7 or 8 years old. I grew up in Zimbabwe, and as a ritual, every morning my mom would have a cup of coffee on the patio, and my brother, my sister, and I would run out into the garden. And in Zimbabwe, there's a lot of dew on the grass, and we used to make footprints, and it was a great fun experience for us. But in Zimbabwe, there are spiders. Now, if you haven't been to Zimbabwe, you don't really know what a spider looks like. I'm sorry, guys, but they are serious spiders. They're fat and they're hairy, and nonetheless, on these morning playtimes, my mom would often say, don't run under the trees, don't go under the bushes, be careful of the spiders. Anyway, one day the game escalated into hide and seek, and I took off down the side of the house. Now, our house, the wall was right next to a tall fence, just the perfect place for spiders to build their webs through the night. So I don't need to tell you what happened. As I ran down the house, I ran into those spiders, the webs. And I actually can remember the anxiety that gripped me. It was panic. And I began to struggle and scream and not know what to do. It's a vivid memory. Anyway, my torment was short-lived because my mum probably had realized what was going to happen before it even happened and shot off to come and rescue me. And the reason I'm telling you the story is that social media is just like a spider's web. There's so many spiders' webs out there that are dangerous, and the spiders are very serious. And they can damage our children. And parents, educators, adults need to realize that social media is a place outside of the home. When children go on their devices, they're stepping outside their home into territories where there are dangers. And we need to know what those dangers are, how to avoid them, and to equip our children how to stay away from them. I remember my mom, once she realized I was fine, she said, why did you run down there? Well, I don't know, but I just did. And that's often how children are getting caught. Why were you on that platform? Well, everybody else is. So it's a real reality. And the problem is there's so much anxiety stemming from it. But it's probably a good time after my little story to ask you, Lauren, how extensive is this problem of anxiety and depression? In your work, have you got some stats, or what can you share with us?
Thanks so much, Bridget. Yes, it's definitely becoming a lot more prevalent, and we're seeing a lot more of younger children dealing with anxiety and depression from various levels. If we just consider some statistics that are going around, of 7% of children that have got anxiety, that is looking at children 3 years to 17 years. But to think the fact that there's children that are 3 years old already struggling with anxiety is scary. My personal experience is my little girl's been struggling with it since the pandemic has happened. And it's been a challenge as a young parent as well. But also, I find that not just looking at anxiety, but then if we take it further and look at children who have depression, children who have depression, over 74% of them have additional to depression anxiety on top of that.
Wow.
So it's not just dealing with how they're feeling with regards to the depression, but now they also have all this anxiety that goes with it. And then on top of that, you have another 47% of children who probably have an additional behavioral issue or a learning struggle or something that comes along with that. And that's incredibly scary for these young children. I mean, overall, yes, 7% of children doesn't sound like a lot. But if you take it from the age from 3 to 17, it's not surprising that we're seeing the behaviors that we are in classrooms, and even the behaviors that we're seeing in friendship groups coming through.
So I find those stats quite significant, and that means as educators, we've definitely got children experiencing that in our classrooms. And maybe it would be nice for you, Tyron, as an educator, to just talk about what schools can do to assist these children and assist these families. What are some of the practical thoughts that you have?
Yeah, so being an addiction counselor, we saw such a huge increase in people using during the time of the pandemic. And I just thought these people are so blessed to get the help that they need and get the tools that they need to deal with these behavioral issues. And there's such a strong link between behavior in addiction and kids that are battling with depression and anxiety. And I'm a firm believer that prevention is better than cure. So I thought, how can we equip our children at a young age to deal with some of these issues that they are facing so they don't turn to an addiction later on in life? And I believe that you will make time for the things that you value. And so as schools, we need to value the holistic health of a child. So I'm a sports director at Redwood College, and it's just a glorified title for a PE teacher. And I thought, we're making time in the diary to help the physical health of children through what we do in a physical education lesson. But especially during the pandemic and with these stats that Lauren has shared, I thought it was so sad that we're not actually making time to deal with their emotional and mental health. And so going into this year, we actually changed the name of physical education to well-being because we wanted to try and find ways to help kids get healthy in every aspect of who they are. And through these lessons, we've been able to give these children just tools that they can use at a young age to improve their mental and emotional health.
Sure, that's amazing. In the work I do with working with social media, and I work with a colleague who's a psychologist, and she often asks me to discuss social media with parents of children who are battling. And one of the questions I get is, why and how is the bullying happening in the social media environment? Didn't it happen on the playground anyway? Aren't we making a big deal out of something that's always been there? And the reality is the stats are showing us that it's just growing. And I'll give you an example of a young chap who really got himself in a big tangle in social media, in that he joined a friend group on WhatsApp, and for whatever reason the group decided to isolate him a little. They decided to pick on him, and it just escalated, and it came to a head over a weekend where he was invited to go down to the beach with the group of boys, which his parents allowed, dropped him off at the beach. I'm talking about a 11-year-old young chap. And when he got to the beach, his friends actually completely isolated him, wouldn't let him sit with them, and it actually eventually ended up in a bit of a physical scuffle amongst the boys. Nothing serious, and Dad might say, boys scuffle, but the hurt is deep. And the problem is then, when he gets home, it's not over, because he opens his phone and the group are laughing about it. Ha ha. We'll call him Johnny. Johnny had a bad day today. And so Johnny lashes out and says mean things on the group. The next morning he's at school, and the girl group says, we don't want to talk to Johnny because he's mean. Look what he said on the group, and it's been posted on. And so he finds himself in the spider web of anxiety that before social media, children might have had a scuffle, but when they got home, it was over, and by the next day, it was generally over. It's just relentless, and that's a really big problem. But Tyron, if I can come back to you, you're saying, you do the lessons. One of the things that is quite difficult is that young children often battle to express how they're feeling. How do you guys cope with that?
Yeah, so I think there's nothing more frustrating as a teacher where you have a heart to find out where the children are at, and you ask the questions, and all you get is I'm fine, it's good, it's okay. And we've got to find ways to try and actually get what they're feeling out, because then we're able to address these issues. And one of the sort of examples that we use at our school is in one of our first wellbeing lessons. I got a buddy bottle of Coke, and I said, when we keep our feelings inside, it's almost like I'm shaking this bottle of Coke. And I said, what do you think is going to happen when I open it? And you can just see eyes, and I do it. Obviously, I make sure we're able to clean it, and the Coke goes everywhere. And I said to children that we need to find ways how to get those feelings out so we don't have this explosion that results in a tantrum or behaving in a way that's out of character. And a great tool that we can use, and you can use this from grade 1 all the way up until grade 12, is to get children to share how they are feeling in the form of a weather report. And so often as educators, we need to practice that. And so I will share that today it feels like there's a bit of cloud, but as the day moves on, I feel like there's going to be some sunshine, and the rain that I was once experiencing has moved away. And it just gives the children a bit of license to maybe share how they're feeling without going into too much detail. And what's amazing is from grade 1 all the way up until grade 12, you will always get the kids who will share their weather report in terms of, it feels like it's been raining for ages and I haven't seen sun. And straight away these red flags come up, and it's like, yo, okay, I need to just try and find out, what is making these kids feel that way. So we found that is a very helpful tool.
Sure, that's amazing.
To help children articulate and give words to how they are feeling. Because as we always say to them, as you're able to identify the feeling, you need to try and find the cause of that feeling. So, what's causing the rain? And then I always say, tell someone, that you trust, what's causing you to feel that way. And we found that as we've given them those tools, we're able to address what we're seeing resulted from a behavior point of view. We're actually getting to the bottom of why they're feeling that way.
Sure, that's an amazing tool. And I think that's just so practical and something the schools can use. And there's probably many educators out there that have other tools that are really helpful. And I just encourage you, if you're out there and thinking, gee, we could use that, or we do this and it works really well, to get some discussion going, and let's hear from you. We would love to hear about the tools that have been used in other schools to help children articulate their feelings around anxiety and depression. But coming back to the Coke bottle, that's a real thing. And I think one of the main things we see in this space is anger. But Lauren, maybe you can come in here and talk about other behavioral changes. I think anger is one that we can easily identify in our classrooms, but are there others that we should be looking out for?
Thanks, Bridget. Yes, no, there definitely are. There's so many different behaviors, but the common ones that will probably be the most prevalent that you can look out for is going to be isolation. Is a very big one. As soon as students start isolating themselves, don't want to get involved in things. So that is one. The other is complete overboard behavior. What I mean by overboard is becoming, if they've never been a very social person and being the center of attention, then going to the complete opposite of isolation and completely wanting to be in everything that's happening, because that's how they feel they are getting attention. They're getting their need of anxiety slightly put aside because they're getting attention and getting that need met. Some of the other ones, obviously you spoke of anger, but then we also have things like fear of making decisions. They don't want to commit to anything because they're unsure of if they will actually be able to perform and do the thing that they are trying to make a decision about. A lot of other times things that we find is they become perfectionists. Everything must always be done perfectly because then there will be some form of response which will be appraised. So those are the main things that you can look out for. And then obviously one other one as well that you can look out for is weight change. If a student is all of a sudden eating a lot or eating a lot less, those will definitely be massive things or not massive, but little clues to help you say that be careful, there's something going on here. And if you have more than one of these happening at the same time, there's a very good chance that they're struggling with some form of anxiety.
That really resonates with me, Lauren. The thing with social media is that it's immediate. And so I think that young children try to control their environment because it's what they are immediately presenting to the world and to their peer groups. And the feedback is immediate. You know, I think of another story where a young girl in her teens, I forget whether she was attending a school dance or whatever, but, you know, she'd gone to a lot of trouble and her photographs went up on social media, on Facebook. And the first comment that came back was, "Lovely dress, but why is your hair like that? Your ears look big." You know, and then there's 17 people who laugh, you know, the little laugh emoji. And that's just soul destroying for a young girl who's, you know, putting her best foot forward. And so the desire for perfection in every way escalates. And I think that what eventually happens is, as a result of the anxiety and not being able to achieve the perfection that's required, they then isolate. Would you agree with that? Does that make sense?
Completely, Bridget. It's one of the easiest ways for anxiety to present and to then turn into depression or lead to depression. Also, because we live in a society where there's pictures everywhere of this is what you must look like, this is a perfect lady or the perfect man, or, you know, what your house should look like or what your career you must have. All of that is this image, which is not true. And everyone is aiming for that.
100%. And it goes beyond image. It's even, you know, in COVID, it was like, you know, snickering, ha ha, so-and-so might have COVID. Don't, you know, make sure that you don't play with them. And particularly younger children who were unable to process, you know, the sensibilities around dealing with the pandemic. Is that something that happened in the school or something you can speak into, Tyron?
Yeah, no, definitely. And just another helpful tool to share is, as educators, we just see the surface level, and a child may seem like they're happy and everything's going well, but we don't know what is going on in their mind, what thoughts they are meditating on. And so we need to be aware of what are the thoughts that are consuming our children and the children that God has entrusted us to look after. And I'm a firm believer that vulnerability breeds vulnerability. So if we're wanting our children to be vulnerable with us, actually as educators, we also need to be vulnerable and not try and pretend that we have it all together. And one exercise that we do is I will ask the children, what is one lie you believe about yourself? And while they're thinking, I'll share an example from my side, and maybe I'll share something like, I believe maybe I'm not a good enough dad because I can't provide for my children the way I would want to financially. So I know it's not true, but it's a lie that the enemy can easily just plant into my mind. And when they see that vulnerability, then all of a sudden they start sharing lies that they're believing about themselves. And as you were saying, it's all so similar around not feeling like they're good enough, feeling like they don't have any friends, that they're ugly, that even some kids will go as far as to saying it would be better if I wasn't born.
Wow.
And when you see these red flags coming up, the best tool we can give them is to replace that lie with the truth. Like, actually, what does God say about them? Yes, that's what man may say about you, it's what you may say about yourself, but what does God say about you? And you just give them positive declarations for them to speak over themselves, and you teach them the power of their words, that actually they're fearfully and wonderfully made, that despite what happened in the past, God is able to turn that around for his good, that in him they are more than conquerors. And when you take notice of the lies that the children are believing about themselves, like I'll make a concerted effort when I see a girl that maybe shared that she didn't feel that she was pretty enough. I'll just say to her in the morning, wow, you look beautiful today. Or if a boy is battling, feeling like he's not good enough at sport and he does something well, to say, yo, that was amazing, my boy. And as much as we are able to teach them to speak positively about themselves, we need to also speak life and call out life from within them, just to replace those lies that the enemy has put in their mind. Because I think that when you are living with those lies, all you are doing is comparing yourself to how the world thinks you should be, and it's all about what you do as opposed to who you are. And when you teach children, actually, this is what God thinks about you, it does just help change that negative mindset that they can develop.
That's so powerful. That really is so powerful, Taryn. And as you're speaking, it makes me think about, as parents, educators, adults, bringing up children to understand their identity.
Yeah.
Because once they know who they are and why they're here and have some connection to their purpose, the spiders become less scary, I think. And so it's a case of identity and really nurturing them to know who they are and what their place is. And many parents will say, okay, so I've heard all this now, or even educators, I've heard all this now, but how do we handle it? Should we just say no social media, no cell phones, no devices? And my answer to that is it's a personal decision, and each family and school has to work it out for themselves. But maybe some guidelines are, one, to know the territory. You know, I was sharing when my son started wanting to go out in the evenings and to places and parties. You know, one of the things that my husband would do if we decided that he could go is he would take him to the venue, even if it was somebody else's house. He would take him to the venue in broad daylight and drive around the block and have a recce and say, you know what, boy, there's a railway track there, or there's a dark alley there, or whatever the case was, so that he knew where he was going and what the territory is. And so adults have to get onto social media and into social media to know what the territory is, to know where the danger is going to lie, so that you can have a constructive discussion with the child about those issues. You lose face with the child when you say social media is a dangerous place, and you start talking about something like Instagram or Twitter, and the child can hear you don't know how the platform works. And so it becomes this territory that is totally foreign to the adult, and the child is then actually leading the decisions. All my friends are on it. My friends are allowed to be on it an hour a day or whatever. Okay, that sounds like a good plan. You can do that too. It's not the way we parent or make decisions in our classrooms for the best of our children. So yeah, I encourage adults to take the time. It can be daunting, but it's not difficult. You can teach yourself anything on the internet. You can go onto Google. You can go onto howdoi.com. How do I use Instagram? How do I do this? And you'll have enough of a lesson to be able to engage with the youngster in a way that lets them know that you actually do know what the social media is all about. And then the second thing is boundaries. We have to have boundaries. We have to say no. And one of the questions that comes to me, and I'm interested on your opinion on this, Lauren, often the children will say, but I'm entitled to a private life. Mom and dad shouldn't be able to check my phone. I'm a teenager now. Why can't I have a private life? And we actually have to undo that lie, as you're saying. It's young children don't have a private life. They have their privacy respected. Yes. But mom and dad and educators should know what's going on, where they're going, and who they're going with. And I can't reiterate enough that social media is a place outside the home. What do you think, Lauren? Should parents be checking children's phones, or how should we be working that? What boundaries?
Yeah. Well, Bridget, you know, it's such a hard one, because you want to give your children the freedom, but you want to make sure that they're safe.
Correct.
Like you're saying, I mean, when we were children, our parents always knew where we were.
Yes.
And, you know, if we don't know where our children are, whether they're out or whether they're at home on a phone,
yes,
it's the same thing. But I can give you an example of a young girl that I know with regards to this boundary situation and the freedom. So she was 13, and had a lovely friendship group at school. They'd all just gotten their phones that year, so obviously had WhatsApp groups and all those things. Was doing very well in school, and then did a little bit too well academically. And then some of the other girls started obviously getting jealous.
Oh, wow.
So they would start bullying and send these messages on the WhatsApp group, and eventually it got to the point where the bullying was so bad. One day, she sent a message to one of the girls in the group, and her friend replied, so-called friend, replied and said, well, nobody really wants you here, so why don't you just kill yourself? Oh. And this is a 13-year-old girl. Thank the Lord, her mother used to check her phone off every now and then, and something prompted her that day, go and check your daughter's phone. And she went and checked it once she had gone out to a class. When she read the messages, she was shocked and decided to search her daughter's room. And what she found is that she'd already taken some of her mother's tablets and hid them away to take them later when her mom was going to go out to the shop.
That is so hectic.
And all we can say is thank the Lord that mother was prompted by the Holy Spirit, because that little girl was shattered. But in the end, she was taken out of the school, put into a kind of an online school, and she is doing so well. She's actually 2 years ahead of her schooling, and she's looking at going to study medical electronics and all those kind of things. So she's just got the most amazing gift of how she thinks and her intellect. But it's very scary, because if we look at it with regards to suicide, you know, the teen suicide rate currently, or in 2020, was 9%, which doesn't sound like a lot. But if you take it from ages 13 to 18...
Is that 9% of people?
9% of teenagers, not adults, teenagers. And that is, again, just resulting from the bullying on social media, anxiety, depression, which gets escalated by all those things then happening as well. So, yeah, I think parents need to know where their kids are. They need to have boundaries.
Absolutely.
And yes, your children might feel that you're not being fair, or you're being mean, or you're not giving me my space or my right to space. I'm sorry. I love you enough to put those boundaries in place. And if you're going to feel like I'm taking away your right to protect you, then that's what must happen.
Sure, and that is such a hectic story, but it really does bring the reality of almost catching the situation almost a little too late. And that's what we're really wanting to urge the adults in young people's lives, to start re-gearing to guiding children to avoid these situations before it's a little bit too late, because they're children and they don't know the consequences. And mom and dad and educators need to step into that space with, as you say, I think you're saying, Lauren, some really tough love. But yeah, Tyron, in your experience, what else can we be doing in the school, or what can we be telling parents as we bring our discussion to a bit of a close? Is there something else that you really wanted to share with the folk?
So I think just touching on that boundaries issue, I think it's so important as teachers, as parents, is to give the why you're putting that boundary in place. I think so often we can just give the how, that you're not allowed your phone at this time, and I'm going to check it at this time, but actually share the why. And we know that our Heavenly Father has put boundaries in place for us because His heart is for us and He doesn't want us to see us hurt. And I always use the example, being a coach, it's one that I can relate to. I always say to the kids, okay, now imagine going to break and you're going to play soccer, but there's no bibs, there's no goals, there's no referee, just take a ball and play. I said, what do you think's going to happen? I said, you're going to have kids shouting, offside, foul, not knowing who's on whose team, not knowing when the ball's out. It'll be an absolute mess. But if you start putting in some boundaries and you put some outlines in place, you separate the teams, bibs, no bibs, you get a referee who blows the whistle, all of a sudden there's a bit of structure. And so I asked the kids, where do you think you're going to have more fun playing? In the first game where there's no boundaries, or in the second game? And it just is that light bulb moment where they're like, oh wow, okay. And I think there's some things we can do at home. I think kids shouldn't take their devices into their rooms after a certain time. And we also need to model that as parents, that almost like at, say, 8 o'clock, whenever's bedtime, all the devices go in one space, almost like a charging station that get charged overnight, but no one takes their devices into their room. And to have that policy of, actually, we can check your children's phones whenever we feel. And it's not from a place of not trusting, but it's because we care. And I think just lastly from my side, Bridget, I think this is an area we can't just rely on our own strength. The Holy Spirit is there to guide us, and He's going to help us see those children that are hurting. He's going to help us discern where there's an issue we can speak into. I believe even in classrooms we can create cultures of honor. And one of the things that we did recently is each week we pair up 2 learners within the classroom, and we get them just to write amazing things about their partner. And then we put that up on the wall, and if ever a nasty word is said about a child, we can actually say, no, I want you to actually see how God sees you. And so we even get to create those cultures. And then just lastly, like the question I'll ask us as educators is, are we thermostats or thermometers? So a thermometer will pick up the temperature of a room, And sometimes children are coming in from hectic backgrounds, and we can almost pick up on their anxiety and their depression and feeling overwhelmed, and that can make us feel the same way. But we're actually called to be thermometers, and we carry the kingdom of God within us, that when we go into a classroom, we can bring joy into that classroom. We can bring peace into that classroom. So despite where the children are coming from, they're able to actually pick up on that culture that we as educators set.
That's so good, Tyron. It's that thing of being absolutely aware of the dangers, aware of what's going on, aware of the statistics Lauren has shared with us, and intentional in the way we go about it. I really would also like to direct the folk out there to Emma Sadlier of the Digital Law Company. She has a Facebook page, and she's amazing. The minute something's happening in the social media space, she posts advice out to parents. Recently, when there was the bit of the shift away from WhatsApp onto Telegram, you know, within half an hour, she was saying, parents, don't allow it. Telegram has so many portals to pornography and various other sites where we wouldn't want children, you know, easily being accessing it. They sell their advertising with different set of parameters, and so the children are going to be exposed to so much more. And I think that's just a wonderful source as a parent when you know a specialist is saying don't do this or do that. There was also the terrible video, coming back to the story of suicide last year, that was doing the rounds on WhatsApp, and again she was out there and on the feed saying, parents, get your cell phones from your kids now. This is what's doing the rounds. And I think that she is doing a lot of good work in giving parents that guidance with immediate sort of notifications as you learn and gain confidence in this territory. So yeah, just to bring it to a close, I thought it would be nice just to go back to the spider web analogy and say it's scary out there, and you know, we on the panel are parents and educators and work with children in various roles, and we know that it's not easy. And again, I don't think expect too much from yourselves in the classroom to be perfect with this thing, but to start learning where the spider webs are. I think when we know where the dangers lie, the dangers are a whole lot less. So Lauren and Tyron, thank you so much for joining us on the panel discussion. To everyone out there, we'd love to hear your comments, and if you've got any questions for any of us, we'd love to make contact with you. And Tyron, I'm going to hand back to you in your role of MC. You can tell us what's up next. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you, Bridget. And I just want to encourage you as educators. It's so easy to listen to topics like this and nod your head and say, yeah, great idea. But we're going to be taking a coffee break now, and I really encourage you to get together with your teams and just see what stood out for you. Maybe there are things that you can do in your environments where you can make time in your schedules to really help the children that are struggling in the area of depression and anxiety. Maybe there are some tools that we've shared that you want to use, but I encourage you, don't just be hearers of the word, be doers of the word.